You're listening to episode number 108 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. In this episode, which is titled The Slightest Impression of Your Thought, we talk about how powerful your thought is. And guess what? Every thought you have makes an impression upon universal consciousness. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. So the title, The Slightest Impression of Your Thought. And, you might be wondering, well, what does that really mean? Before I dig into this podcast, I want to share something with you. I want to read something to you. So just stay with me as I'm reading this. And I'll tell you more. I'll tell you who this came from once I'm done. So here we go. Just imagine yourself surrounded by mind, so plastic, so receptive, that it receives the slightest impression of your thought. Whatever you think, it takes up and executes for you. Every thought is received and acted upon. Not some, but all thoughts. Whatever the pattern we provide, that will be our demonstration. If we cannot get over thinking that we are poor, then we will still remain poor. As soon as we become rich in our thought, then we will be rich in our expression. These are not mere words, but the deepest truth that has ever come to the human race. Hundreds of thousands of the most intelligent thinkers and the most spiritual people of our day are providing this truth. We are not dealing with illusions, but with realities. Pay no attention to the one who ridicules these ideas than you would to the blowing of the wind. In the center of your own soul, choose what you want to become, to accomplish. Keep it to yourself. Every day, in the silence of absolute conviction, know that it is now done. It is just as much done, as far as you are concerned, as it will be when you experience it in the outer. Imagine yourself to be what you want to be. See only that which you desire. Refuse even to think of the other. Stick to it, never doubt. Say many times a day, I am that thing. Realize what this means. It means that the great universal power of mind is that, and it cannot fail. Very powerful passage. This was written over 100 years ago by Ernest Holmes. He was a teacher in the field, and in a field that I believe he created called Science of Mind. But this was excerpted from Creative Mind and Success by Ernest Holmes, and that was Tarcher, Tarcher/Putnam Publishing. And I believe, again, I don't believe it's early 1900s. I'm not sure of what year I was going to say. Let's take this passage. I've had this passage on my wall for probably the last, 20 years. And I didn't get really serious about it, meaning I didn't really dig into it until maybe the last 15 to 20 years. And when I dug into it, that's when my life started changing. So let's dig into that passage in this episode, and let's see where this takes you. Because, if I had to guess, there's probably a small percentage of you that have heard of Ernest Holmes, and maybe some of you have even read this passage. And what I want to do is I want to take it apart. And I want to go through the entire passage. I don't want to make it a long episode because candidly, it's very late, and this is due to my editor tomorrow morning. Even though we don't edit a lot, my podcast is still due tomorrow morning, and it's already 1 a.m. So if I stumble around here or whatever, then so be it. But I want to get this recorded, and that way I can finish some more work tonight. Okay, the first part of the passage. Just imagine yourself surrounded by mind, so plastic, so receptive, that it receives the slightest impression of your thought. When he says this, what he means, so plastic, so receptive, is that he means that your mind, every thought you have, you're impressing upon the quantum field, the quantum dimension. You are consciousness, and every thought that you have is alive. I remember a while back when I was at my house in Sedona. It was back in November, and I was sitting there watching the fire. I was the only one there, and it was late at night. I was watching the fire flicker in the fireplace, and I had Hauser, the celloist, and on the background, and I was watching the fire flicker, and it was just very, very peaceful, very quiet. And I shot a video, and I posted it to one of my transformational groups. And I said, what's so powerful about this? And I got many different answers. And where I was going is that fire is alive. Literally, fire is alive. It's one of the elements, earth, wind, fire, and water. And just like fire is alive, your thoughts are alive. So when you think about that, your thoughts are alive, and the universe picks up the slightest impression of your thoughts. So that being a truth of physics and a truth of metaphysics and ancient wisdom, what I want you to do right now is I want you to look at your thoughts today. Just today. Forget the past week, the past month, the past coronavirus stuff. Just look at today. And I want you to look at your thoughts about your job. Your thoughts about your money. The thoughts, if you have money in the stock market, your thoughts about that. Your thoughts about your wife or your husband, your boyfriend or your girlfriend. I don't know, maybe you have both, a boyfriend and a girlfriend. I don't know, but look at your thoughts. Look at your thoughts about your kids today in school, and look at your thoughts about the future and your future. I mean, the planet literally is just blanketed still in so much fear that's sensationalized by the media. Look at your thoughts about the coronavirus. Look at the thoughts about your industry now. Look at that. Your thoughts are alive. And then how does that give new meaning to the first passage? Is that the slightest impression of your thought, literally, when I went on to say, impresses upon the quantum field. And we create by our thoughts. So it's hard for a lot of us. And this is a great chasm that we have to jump at some point in our life. Many people don't. And it's my intention, and my intent here is to help you jump this chasm, is to separate yourself mentally from yourself physically. I mean, many of us, we determine who we are. And we think about our lives only in the physical context. But if you look at your life, literally you are just like the fire, and even more so because you are consciousness in a different way, and a much higher level and a much higher degree, is you're alive. Your thoughts are alive. So I'm thinking here as I'm going through this, and I remember, looking at the masses right now, and I'm curious about how much of your thinking is influenced by the masses right now. Many of you are influenced by the news, and the news quite literally is just sensationalized toxicity. I mean, it's absolute human mental garbage. But I remember one time somebody saying that when the masses go one way, I go the opposite direction. And that's the way that I've lived my life, is when 99% of the masses are running to the left, I'm the 1% running to the right, because generally the masses are always wrong. And what I mean by that, just in a simple way here, look at the US. Statistically, 78% of the American population lives paycheck to paycheck. If they had it right, then 78% of the population wouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck. I want to share with you about your thinking and your thinking impressing upon universal consciousness. How much of your thinking is affected by the masses? And I have to say that never in my lifetime have I seen the prevalence and plethora of nonsensical and ridiculous noise out in the world. Everything from the news, which is literally just, I mean, like I said, it's toxicity, and so much of it's not true. So much of it is. When I say it's not true, it's not true. There and the amount of humans just following other human beings, and the amount of poor leadership coming out of perhaps leadership capitals in the United States and different parts of the world. I mean, we don't even have leadership in the United States, and that's not a political opinion, that's an observation. But never in my lifetime, I'm making an observation, have I seen so much information put out that's creating interpretations upon the masses that are putting the masses in fear and keeping the masses trapped. So I'm going to move on here, but what I want you to look at with the first part of taking this apart is just imagine yourself surrounded by mind, so plastic, so receptive. Well, what is that plasticity and receptivity picking up from your thinking? And then what is it bringing back to you that it's creating for you in your own life? Okay, next passage. Whatever you think, it takes up and it executes for you. I want to bring this home to me, and I'm not this person anymore, but many years ago, and I would say 30 years ago, I didn't recognize it in myself, but somebody told me, they said, Jim, you're very negative. And I never thought that about myself because we don't see ourselves a lot of times, and especially when we're younger. Because I never thought that I was negative. I thought that I was just being a realist. Yet I had no idea of any of the content that I'm sharing with you in this podcast. And I remember that a woman one time said to me, somebody that I worked with, she was literally very direct. She goes, "Oh my God, I saw you walking into the building. And you know what? You're the most negative person that I know, and I dread seeing you coming." Wow. Okay, that was pretty heavy. And I just listened and I took it in. And as I look back at my life back then, I don't think I was necessarily the negative Nancy per se, but I was the pragmatist about the world, not knowing anything that I'm sharing in this podcast. And when I look back 30 years ago, guess what? My life corresponded, and my money corresponded, and my life corresponded, my situations and my circumstances, to my lack of understanding and my air quote pragmatism about how the world was and how it wasn't. So what we're talking about in this podcast is that the universe receives the slightest impression of your thought. You ever heard the phrase before? Be careful what you wish for. Because what you're wishing for is what you're holding in your consciousness. And what you're holding is what you're going to bring to you. So just like me, many years ago, and I didn't recognize it, have you ever really noticed the exact correlation between your thoughts and your life? Because I promise you, I've been in this field for a lot of years, and I look at myself 30 years ago, and I look at all the people that I've coached, and I promise you that where you are right now today, forget the coronavirus, forget what's going on in the external world around you. And it doesn't mean literally forget it, but I'm just saying for the purpose of this podcast episode, what I want you to look at right now is you could say, well, I am where I am because of the coronavirus, and I am here financially, and I am there financially, and my job is here, and I'm at home, or I'm not, whatever. But you know what? You are exactly where you are in your life right now because of the thinking that you hold. Your thoughts have delivered to you the object of your dominant thoughts. Now, if you've listened for any amount of time here in the podcast, you also know that I'm not a rah-rah motivator. So what you want to look at also, your thoughts and where they're coming from, which we're not going to dig into in this episode, but what you want to look at is, okay, my thoughts right now, my thoughts come from my identity, which means you are where you are in your life right now because of who you are. So 30 years ago, I thought that I was a pragmatist and I thought that I didn't see things that other people saw and I thought I was a hell of a lot smarter than what I actually was and all this stuff. But the truth is this, I was where I was back then because of the object of my dominant thoughts. You are where you are right now, even if you can't, connect all the dots. You are where you are because of your thinking. I recently read in a private group that I'm in. It's my college fraternity. We're still connected many years. There's a private group. And somebody said, well, I don't have any savings. Well, guess what? They are where they are as a result of their dominant thoughts. Have I been there? Absolutely. Am I there today? Absolutely not. My only illustration there is that person is, and they were owning it, by the way. My only point is that they are there with no savings wherever they are in life today is because that is a reflection of their thoughts about savings, whether it be a year ago or 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. Make no mistake. You are where you are because of your thoughts. So simple that most of us miss it. Okay, next in the passage. Every thought is received and acted upon, not some thoughts, but all thoughts. There's a phrase that I learned many years ago, and I love this phrase. I have found it to be demonstrated in my life. I found it to be empirical, is that we live in a universe of no mercy. Now, what I mean by that, a universe of no mercy, is basically the universe does not give you Monday off. The universe does not say, you know what, you can be negative all Monday. No worries. We're going to filter it out. I mean, come on, we're the universe. We're going to filter it out on Monday. Or you can be negative all week, but you know what, that's only 1 week out of a month. Be negative all week long. We're going to filter it out. No, it doesn't happen that way. There's no mercy. The universe does not give you Monday off. It does not give you the second Tuesday every month off. The universe does not give you a week off every month. Whatever you give the universe is what the universe gives you. Whatever thinking that you have will be acted upon no matter what the thinking is or when you do it or if you do it after 10 p.m. or if you do it on a full moon or if you do it first thing in the morning. Whatever thoughts you have based upon how we started this podcast, whatever thoughts you have will be acted upon. You know, I want to share with you a little sticky Post-it note that I've had on my computer for a lot of years. And it's a very, very simple phrase. And the phrase is this: so as I am projecting, so as I am receiving. Again, so as I am projecting, so am I receiving. So think about that. So if you think about what you're receiving in your life, because everything is thought. And, years ago, my tagline, my USP wanted to be everything is mental, but I thought that sounded too much like the post office. Anyway, off the topic. But what I want you to look at is, what are you receiving in your life? Because what you're receiving is what you're projecting with your thought. And as you may or may not already know and learned before, is that thought reacts to the slightest impression, or the universe reacts to the slightest impression of your thought. So whatever you're projecting is what you're receiving right back. And if you're not receiving what you want, then you have to look at what are you projecting by your thoughts. I also want to point out there that when people hear that, because this is what people do, is they tend to make everything physical, is people tend to think, well, if I don't have money or if I don't have a brand new car or a house or a job or whatever, okay, I get it, Jim, that's what I'm projecting. But what I also want to look at here is the non-physical. And I hear so many people say, you know what, I'm tired of all the haters. I don't want to get hated on. Whole different topic about the fear of judgment. But the reality is that when I say rarely, I rarely get hated on. And even when I do, it's not like tragically hated on like a lot of people. I mean, one of my friends told me on YouTube, somebody said, why don't you go kill yourself? I mean, that's some significant hate. And he's a great guy. Somebody just, it was an internet troll. But I rarely get hated on. And I think that, and I look at that, it's because I don't hate on other people online. Of course, I'll make comments here and there, and I don't engage a whole lot anyway in my personal Facebook and stuff like that. But I'll occasionally make a comment, mainly if I want to rattle a cage. But I don't hate on people, and I don't secretly hate on their posts on you or their videos on YouTube or anything. I don't. And I think that as I'm projecting, meaning I'm not projecting hate, I'm projecting do your own thing and be at peace and joy and all that. I think as I'm projecting that, I know that I'm receiving that back again. So seriously look at, and people miss this a lot. It's the psychological and emotional aspects. What people are giving back to you, what people are giving back to you is what you're projecting into the world. And that's a big one for a lot of us. Next part of the passage, whatever the pattern we provide, that will be our demonstration. I mean, I just covered it with as we're projecting, so as we are receiving. But folks, I've done this a lot of years at many different levels, and I've worked with all walks of life, all the way from Main Street to Wall Street to having, I lived in New York City at one point. I had celebrity clients. I mean, very, very famous people. I worked with very, very wealthy people that lived on Park Avenue that would send their drivers to pick me up on Fifth Avenue, private offices at Rockefeller Center, entire floors of apartment buildings people lived on Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue. I've seen the whole gamut of people, at least here in the U.S. And I'm going to tell you what we miss. We miss it is that what we put out is what we get back. And the old phrase, what comes around goes around. And it's so simple, black and white, like third grade, right in front of our face, and we miss it. And then I bring it back to opening up this podcast. What you have is what you've created. Because we live in a universe of no mercy, nothing more and nothing less. And let me give you an example that I've used many times. I learned from my mentor. It's a really poignant metaphor. Is my mentor once shared with me is that what comes out of us is what's in us. And I created an episode on that. And the metaphor that I used is if you squeeze an orange, then orange juice is going to come out. If you squeeze a lemon, then lemon juice is going to come out. And somebody posted that yesterday in one of my groups, one of my transformational groups, and I thought, okay, I'm going to use that on the podcast. And let's look at you mentally. How much love, how much hate, anger, greed, envy, compassion, self-worth, worthlessness, how much of that comes out, how much of that's in you? Because see, what's in you comes out of you, and it comes out of you in your thinking, and then your thinking comes out of you in your words, which I also created an episode called We Speak Our Life into Existence. And I'd also mention Khalil Gibran, where he said our words are simply drippings of the mind. But I'm going to tell you, when it comes to this whole matriculation and this whole process that I just shared with you, there's two huge things that I see coming out of people. Number one is a lack of self-worth. And secondly, male and female, both, even though women don't show it as much, is anger. So whatever's in you, and when I say a lack of self-worth and anger, how much of that do you have in you? How much of that comes out in your thinking? And then go back again to the very premise of this entire episode is that the universe picks up the slightest impression of every single thought that you have. So if your thoughts are, I'm worthless, the universe is going to use that thinking and confirm that experience for you. It's going to bring experiences in your life to confirm that. If you're angry, the universe is going to bring things into your life to confirm the anger. So please consider the subtleness of what I'm sharing with you here. Okay, next part of the passage. And I have been there big time on this one. If you've listened to any amount of the podcast, and if you've not, if you're new, welcome. And I tell everyone, go back to the very beginning and start there. I've heard time and time and time again, and I'm grateful. The amount of people that have said, you know what, Jim, I just started at episode number 1, And I've gone through all the episodes, and I've done it multiple times. And thank you for allowing me to be of service. But the next passage was, and trust me, you've heard this in the episodes. Next part of the passage. If we cannot get over thinking that we are poor, then we will still remain poor. As soon as we become rich in our thought, then we will become rich in our expression. You've heard it here many times. I mean, for crying out loud, I grew up very, very working class. I grew up poor. I grew up getting up at 5 in the morning when I was in high school and going out to feed the cattle, a small town Texas farm boy. I grew up thinking you had to struggle with money to get money. I grew up thinking you had to work hard. I grew up thinking you had to know people. I grew up with all of this, and all this being said, when I had that thinking, that was the slightest impression of my thought, and literally it blanketed everything in my life. I used to talk to myself, as many of you do, or some of you do. I used to talk to myself. Remember that thought is, the words are drippings from the mind. I used to talk to myself about how poor I was. And that being said, on a daily basis, how often do you talk to yourself about how poor that you are? And it took me many years to really get it, because people used to say to me, and they've said it my entire life, and I do mean this humbly. I took an IQ test in college, and candidly, I scored pretty darn high on it. But people always used to say to me, Jim, you're a really, really, really smart guy. And that's because I used to consume tons and tons of books. But you know what? That still didn't make me rich. And because why? Because I was still in my identity level. I was still that poor person. And I used to talk to myself about being that poor person. And every time and every day and any moment, because I never got a day off, because we live in a universe without mercy, is the universe would always demonstrate to me, and it would demonstrate the impressions of my thinking, which was money's hard to come by. And I'm always going to be broke, and I've got to struggle. And where I started this conversational loop was people were always like, you're a really smart guy. You can do anything you want. You must be a big success. Well, on the outside, yes. But on the inside, no. Now, for many years, honestly, I've been I don't know. I mean, I've done very, very well for many, many years, extremely well for many years. But that didn't happen until I jumped that chasm in my mind of being poor in my mind, like I just read a couple of minutes ago, because I was poor in my mind for so long. And as long as I was poor in my mind, I was always poor in my external experience. And I want to share, as I've said before, that's the biggest chasm for a lot of us to jump, is getting over being poor in our mind, because we're living from our external experience, and then we talk to ourselves about it, and then those are impressions, because everything you talk to yourself about is a thought, and you're creating that impression upon universal consciousness, and you're creating that experience for you. Next, there are not mere words. These are not mere words, but the deepest truth that has ever come to the human race. Obviously it hasn't come to a large degree of the human race, because so much of the human race is caught in the past. I mean, I'm not going to go into it now, but most of humanity lives on stories and fables and illusions and myths created thousands and thousands of years ago. I mean, most of us live in the past because of culturalization, not even knowing that we're living in the past. I remember I've said it here on a podcast episode. I'd asked which I learned many years ago from a friend of mine, very smart guy. And he said, do you know why the space shuttle is the width that it is? And I said, no, I don't. And he goes, it is the width that it is because the space shuttle at one point had to be put on a train. And the train is only so wide because of train tracks. And train tracks were modeled many years ago on Roman chariot, the width of Roman chariot wheels. And the point is, oh my gosh, we are living. The space shuttle today is living, and it's being literally handicapped by something from thousands of years ago. So even though that I just said that this is the deepest truth that has come to the human race, so few people know it. I mean, I didn't even know it till this weekend. I was just zoning out on some documentary stuff Literally, it's actually really good. It was the history of the United States in color, and it went through each decade in color, and it was really good on Amazon. Amazon, the 20s, I thought it was really good. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I didn't know, as an interesting little factoid, that back in the 50s, overpasses, when we started creating all these highways in the U.S., overpasses were actually they were raised to a height or created at a height of 17 feet. Do you know why? Does anyone listening right, do you know why our overpasses for the most part are 17 feet? I bet you don't know that unless you've seen this and you remember that factoid. Why? So that nuclear armament could be put on trucks, on semis, and be hauled across the U.S. In particular, nuclear missiles, if I remember correctly, could be hauled across the U.S. and it would fit under the overpasses. So today we build overpasses at 17 feet. Nobody even knows why. I mean, there's not Fred out there building, an overpass saying, why is it 17 feet? It was something created 70 years ago, but we're still living by it today. So when I said these are not mere words, but the deepest truth that has ever come to the human race. I mean, for crying out loud. You can read it in the Bible, the Torah, the Kabbalah, the Quran, the I Ching, and other great works, and we still miss it. Even you've heard me say before that the physics experiment, the double slit experiment, proves that our physical world bends to our consciousness, but yet the masses don't know it. So what we do as the masses is we persist on working from the outside in. We persist on working from, okay, this is how much money I have in the bank, and this is what my job is, and this is what CNN says, or Fox says, or Reuters, or somebody in Washington, D.C., or Berlin, or Tokyo, or Lima, or wherever. These are what people say on the outside. Therefore, let me conform my thinking to what I hear on the outside, and then guess what? The slightest impression of my thought literally goes out into the universe and then returns back to me, not even recognizing we're living from the inside out. And then next, hundreds of thousands of the most intelligent thinkers and most spiritual people of our day are proving this truth. Yes, that's true. I think hundreds of thousands of people are proving this, but the reality is this. A simple fact that I mentioned earlier, it was in USA Today, I believe, probably 6 to 8 months ago, is that 78% of the American public lives paycheck to paycheck. Well, hundreds of thousands of us might know it this day and age, and you know what we're talking about here, but guess what? The masses don't know it because there are not enough people talking about it. Seriously, more people need to hear what you're hearing here about, what? Our lives are not created by our external worlds. Our lives are created by our internal world. Our lives are created by our thought, and the universe acts upon the slightest impression of our thought. Next passage. We're not dealing with illusions, but with realities. Pay no more attention to the one who ridicules these ideas than you would the blowing of the wind. I'm going to tell you right now, the masses are going to ridicule you because, see, people who listen to this podcast are forward thinkers. I know that. I know my audience. I know who I attract. Generally metaphysical, spiritual, progressive, forward-thinking people. And I would have to guess that people are not that. They don't listen to the podcast very long. But being a forward-thinking person, I'm going to tell you that the masses are going to ridicule you because the masses are not forward-thinking. If the masses were progressive, forward-thinking people, do you think in the U.S. 78% of the population would be living paycheck to paycheck? The answer is hell no to that. And what I want to point out is that I've been ridiculed my entire life for thinking ahead of the curve. And you might laugh at that saying, well, who said you think ahead of the curve? Well, I don't know. I've just heard it a lot in my life that I think ahead of the curve. And I've heard many people say, you're weird, Jim. But you know what? To me, that's a compliment. Seriously, that is a compliment because guess what? Which I'll get to in a moment. It's not the average thinking person who changes the world. So even being ridiculed, I laugh here that Many people who go through my programs, and it's about 70% women, 30% men, maybe 60-40. Many people will say, Jim, I knew I needed to get into your transformational coaching program. And I hear this invariably. My husband and my wife, they're not on board with the thinking that I'm learning here. And so guess what? The partner sometimes is supported, sometimes it's ridiculed, but progressive thinking years ahead of the masses, is always ridiculed. And that reminds me of a quote by the German philosopher, I might mangle his name, but Arthur Schopenhauer. And he said, all truths pass through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Secondly, it's violently opposed. Third, it's accepted as being self-evident. Right now, we're at a phase, I think, in our evolution as a being, as a species. We are at the first stage where anything that people can't touch or see or smell or feel with their physical senses to a large degree is ridiculed. I mean, people ridicule, air quote, woo-woo. People ridicule New Age. And if they were educated, they would know that New Age is actually old age. New Age is quantum physics, so it's of the new era, but New Age content, for the most part, a large degree, is ancient wisdom. It's stuff that's been around thousands and thousands of years on the planet, but people ridicule it. Next sentence, next passage. In the center of your own soul, choose what you want to become, to accomplish, and keep it to yourself. What I want to share here is this. Do as you wish. There's some research that if you want to lose weight, for example, then let people know, because people are going to hold you externally accountable. But when it comes to like what I would call air quote big things that I want to create in my life, I don't tell anyone. I don't share it on the podcast. You've never once heard me say, I want to impact this amount of people or that amount of people. I don't say any of that. All that I do is I stay on purpose. I have my intent. I know what I want to do. I want to show up on each and every episode, even if it's 1:52 in the morning like it is right now. But you know what? I know the truth in me, and I know what it is that I'm here to do on the planet. And I don't need to share it. All I need to do is demonstrate it by walking my talk. So in the center of your own soul, choose what you want to become, to accomplish, and keep it to yourself. Next passage. Every day, in the silence of absolute conviction, know that it is now done. It is just as much done as far as you are concerned as it will be when you experience it on the outer. Now, I have it, one of the earlier episodes, one of the first 5 episodes, and I teach this in all my programs. And what I teach people is this. I teach that when you can write this down, when it comes to reprogramming the subconscious mind, what I teach people is this, and to write this down. What would I think? What would I do? How would I feel? And who would I be if I already, operative word, already had blank? And the reason that, let me read it again. What would I think? What would I do? How would I feel? And who would I be if I already had blank? And the reason why, because that illustrates what he just said here. In the silence of absolute conviction, know that it is now done. It is just as much done as far as you are concerned as it will be when you experience it on the outer. Now, candidly, I forgot about that entire passage when I wrote that sentence that I just gave you that I work from, is knowing that it's already done. Because when I know that it's already done, whether it's health and wellness or healing or impacting people or whatever it is, when I know, and the operative word is know, when I know that it's already done, I've literally signaled to the universe it's a done deal. Where I work from there with that is, let me give you an example here. When I send a FedEx, I already know it's going to show up. I mean, I've never in my life ever had one FedEx ever lost. I already know. And that's what I mean. Maybe that's an everyday example that you might want to use. But when I send a FedEx, I already know that it's done. And so when I want to create something, that's where I work from, is what would I think? What would I do? How would I feel? And who and how would I be if I already had blank? By the way, I'm a little hoarse today. The weather's changing. We've had some wonky weather. I'm in Dallas right now, back and forth. One day it's warm, one day it's cold. So it's having a bit of effect on my voice. So what I just said reminds me also, because you can dream anything, it reminds me of a quote by George Bernard Shaw. And he says, you see things and say, why? But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? So when it comes back to what I'm just talking about, is that whatever you want to create, act as if. And other people are going to laugh at. That's why I don't tell other people, but they're going to laugh at you. And in this world we live in, many people are going to roll their eyes. And what I want to point out there is this. This is something that a lot of people don't get. Can you imagine when the Wright brothers were trying to fly that day in that field? Could you imagine if we put lawn chairs out and people were sitting there eating popcorn and watching? They're like, look at those two fools trying to fly, because everybody knows you can't fly. It just reminded me of something that I read many years ago. I don't remember who it was. It was some guy who ran the patent office in the U.S. back in like 1890s. And he said that there was no longer a need for the patent office because everything that could be invented was already or had already been invented. So what I wanted to point out there is it's not the realist that changed the world. It is not the rational people who changed the world. It is not the linear people who changed the world. It's always the crazy people who change the world. It's the Wright brothers. It's actually an engineering marvel, Henry Ford. It's Tesla. It's Da Vinci. It's the ones that people call crazy are the ones that change the world. And to the point of this entire episode, what do you think their thinking is? What do you think and how do you think the Wright brothers were thinking? And Ford and Tesla and Da Vinci and Einstein and Salk and Mandela and Gandhi and all these people. They're just people, but it's the way that they thought. It's never the reasonable people. And I remember one of my coaches said to me one time, and I love this phrase. We're talking about reasonable people. And he said, reasonable people, they live reasonable lives and they make reasonable money and they have a reasonable impact. And that's about it. And I've always remembered that phrase. And by the way, there's no judgment on that. I mean, I'm not sitting here trying to rah hype you up. Literally, if I'm telling you the truth, which I am, I just want you to take a step out there a little bit. Reckon and more than what you are. But stop being reasonable because that's going to keep you trapped. Question here. What if, just suppose for a moment, just suppose, because see, every thought you have is taken up and acted upon. Just suppose for a moment that I told you it's 1:52 in the morning, not you let it, but just suppose for a moment that you let your thoughts start becoming unreasonable based upon other people's expectations about life. What then would the universe take up and act upon? Next, imagine yourself to be what you want to be. See only that which you desire. Refuse even to think of the other. Stick to it and never doubt. My sister and I laugh at this because my sister came up with the phrase long ago, STD. And one day she's like, hey, brother, I want to give you an STD. And I'm like, hey, we don't live in Mississippi, sis, okay? I don't need your STD. And I'm kidding, and I apologize to people who live in Mississippi. I mean, come on, it's early in the morning. I've got to make a joke there, a little levity. But STD is surrender, trust, and do not doubt. And in all honesty, that's where I live my life, is with an STD, is surrender, trust, and do not doubt. Because when I hold my thinking in that place, that's when the magic happens and that's when the miracles happen. And then a couple of more things here. Say many times a day, I am that thing. And I just did a couple of episodes on that. Let me finish first. Say many times a day, I am that thing, and realize what that means. It means that the great universal power of mind is that, and it cannot fail. So when you say, and you hold, listen to my voice tone, I am that thing. When you actually own that, a couple of episodes was on intention. Remember that when I talked about using your will and using your intent. And when you say, I am that thing, you are using your will and intent. And then back to the passage. It means that the great universal power of mind is that, and it cannot fail. You are divine mind. And again, many of you can't see that in yourself because you're looking at yourself physically as, what do you mean I'm divine mind? I mean, I'm Joe Schmo from Topeka, Kansas, and I'm Jane Doe from Podunk, this town or that or whatever. But you're divine mind. When you look at, for example, the ocean, a single drop of water still has the chemical composition of the ocean. Just because you can't see it physically or touch it or smell it, it doesn't mean that you are not divine mind. So, where did this come from? I mentioned earlier it came from Ernest Holmes, Creative Mind and the Success. Creative Mind and Success by Ernest Holmes. So if you want to get the passage, simply Google it. You can get the entire passage online and then do with it as you want. But I want to share with you here a thing to do is sit down and get very clear with what you want in your life. When I say very clear, many people will say, well, I don't have a vision or I don't know what I want. No, that's nonsense. You know what you want. You know what you want. It's that you think you can't have it because you can't see a way to get there because you're working from your circumstances. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to sit down and I want you to get very clear on what you want. I want you to write it down and I want you to read it 3 times a day. Keep it short. I mean, literally handwrite it. Do not type it. Handwrite it. A half a page at the most, a couple of paragraphs. But I want you to read it with conviction and I want you to own it and I want you to see it as already done. And I want you to do this, I request, 3 times a day. In the morning, at lunch, and right before bed, or in the afternoon. Basically 3 times a day. When you get up, in the afternoon, and before you go to bed. And it might not happen right away, but I give you my word, I promise, when you do this, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month, you will start to feel changes in your mind. Couple of reasons. Why? Because you're literally reprogramming your subconscious mind. And secondly, to the point of this episode, is that divine mind, universal consciousness, is taking up the slightest impression of every thought that you have, and divine mind is acting upon the slightest impression of your thought. So your transformational takeaway this week is the slightest impression of your thought will manifest. And if you don't have what you want in life, it's time to sit down and to get quiet and to look at the slightest impression of your thoughts. Because I want to promise you this, nobody is consciously saying, let me F up my life. Let me run away prosperity. Let me run away and chase off love and happiness and the homes and the cars and the prosperity and the abundance. None of us are consciously doing that. But if it's happening to you, it's happening from your thought, and it's happening in the slightest of ways that you're probably not even recognizing. Okay, next episode. I think I already know what it's going to be, and it's going to come out of this episode, but you've got to tune in to find out. Okay, thanks for listening, and do what you can to make it a great day today. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. You know, if you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, If you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one, by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform